What's good, mi gente? Welcome back. It's your boy Raul. Welcome to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish. Today, my guest is Jon Marcantoni. How's it going, John?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing all right, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on here. It's just to kind of give a little background on John. Jon Marcantoni is a Puerto Rican novelist and playwright. The author of 5 books. He won the 2017 Independence Book Award for Best Southeastern Fiction for his book Kings of the Avenue. After the success of his play Puerto Rican Nocturne about the Cerro Maravilla murders and their aftermath, he founded Flamboyán Theater in 2022. The company produces new Puerto Rican plays and seeks to build a creative hub for Denver's Puerto Rican community to celebrate their culture and stories while utilizing multimedia and multi-modal forms of performance for the 21st century theatrical experience. John, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for today.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, and like I said, what was great is I really appreciate you reaching out to me, and wanting to share your story. So I guess to kind of start off, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who is John?
Well, I'm a father of 3 kids. My oldest is in college at University of Colorado, studying to be a music teacher. And then I got two teens, and yeah, I believe you were telling me your child is 10. So I'm sure you've heard all the warnings,
Hmm.
but actually, I really love them. They're 12 and 14, and they're turning into such creative, fun kids. So, but aside from all that, huge movie nerd. I'm one of those people that sees all the Oscar movies, and so like this last weekend was like my Christmas basically. And I also, I've been in Colorado since 2014, actually coming up on my 10-year anniversary, which is kind of crazy to me. I came out here in the Army, which was a whole experience, and it was all due to the Great Recession, making life really miserable for anybody who graduated in 2009, 2010, like I did. And I'm just your regular crazy artistic guy. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. Nice. No, thank you for that. And it's I'm a big movie guy too, so I just watched Dune 2 last weekend, and I love all types of
We're
movies.
meaning to see it.
No, it's good. It's a really good movie. So,
Mhm.
so I guess my first question is, it seems like you've kind of been all over the place. Where did you
Mhm.
grow up?
Uh, well, kind of all over up and down the East Coast, but mostly in the South. Georgia, South Carolina, Florida. Spent a lot of time going back and forth from there to the island, particularly to Fajardo and to Dorado. Um, and so it's kind of like two sides of San Juan. And Fajardo, for me, was always home. I was very, very close to my mother's parents, and especially my abuela. She was kind of more of a mother to me, to be honest. But yeah, her home in Fajardo is where I always called it to be my hometown, even though I lived in Augusta, Georgia, which is mostly known for the Masters. Um, but yeah, it was very different being Puerto Rican outside of the normal enclaves that you usually think of Puerto Ricans to be in. Um, and, uh, and I think that offered me a unique experience, which I really treasured.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia's a. Is there a big population of Puerto Ricans in Georgia at all? Or I know Florida is, but not.
Not particularly.
No.
Well, not that part of Georgia. I mean, in Atlanta, there's quite a few Puerto Ricans, but the Latinos I was mostly around were Mexican Americans, and and also I lived in kind of a strange place because my dad was or is an engineer, and he worked at a nuclear power plant called Savannah Riverside, and that it being a nuclear power plant, it invited people from all over the world. So I had a lot of Asian classmates, I had a lot of African American classmates, a lot of Indian classmates in particular, and so like it was just it was very like cosmopolitan for not being a very cosmopolitan place, I guess you could say. Like it was it was a small city, but it felt a little bit like Queens. Some of those parts of Queens you can go into where you hear like 20 different languages you didn't even know existed. But it's one big community. Like there were parts of Augusta that were like that, and and just as a funny anecdote, it's also why I'm one of the few Puerto Ricans who love spicy food. uh, which is something that always like messes up Americans. Like Americans are like, "What are you talking about? You're Caribbean. Like you have to love spicy food." It's like, no. That's just Jamaicans. Yeah. Aside from Jamaicans, the rest of the food is it's savory, it's sweet, it's not spicy whatsoever. But I had for a little while when I was a kid, we had neighbors who were from South India, and they would invite us over all the time. A wonderful family. Invite us over all the time, and got me addicted to spices. Got me addicted to that curry. So it's done well for me now living in Colorado. My wonderful girlfriend is Mexican, and it allows me to hang with her, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's funny the way you mentioned that, because I think it's for. I remember one of the first times I went to this Puerto Rican restaurant to have mofongo, and it was in Houston, and there was the owner who was also the chef and cooking everything, and he comes up to me and he goes, "Oh, try this pique. I made this pique. And I was like, "Oh yeah, let me put it on," and it was like the most mildest hot sauce I ever had. And I was just like, "Oh, okay, no, it's good. I'm Peruvian. I know what spicy means, but no, it's cool." No, yeah. But it's hilarious the way that you mentioned that. So that's awesome. So I got my wife getting a little more spicy too because she's Puerto Rican. So I'm getting her used to some of the Peruvian spices. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah. No, my sister-in-law is actually Peruvian.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So my brother married a Peruvian who we met in Germany.
Nice.
So
we're all over the place,
which is a great entryway to just talk about like Puerto Ricans are like all island people are. We are a gateway to the entire world, and I think that more than being citizens of any one place, we're citizens of the entire world. And that's one of the beautiful things about us as a culture, is that we can let in all sorts of people, appreciate the different things about them, appreciate them as human beings, and still maintain who we are intrinsically. And I think that is something special with island cultures, that we welcome in the mixture of different people and different cultures.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you guys are such a melting pot, that it allows you to be open to all sorts of different cultures, because you guys have so many different cultures. I mean, someone who's grown up his whole life, people thinking I'm Puerto Rican, you know what I mean?
Right.
You guys blend in everywhere, and it's great. I love Puerto Rican. I mean, I married one. I mean, obviously, so I love the Puerto Rican culture, and so yeah, it's been great. And so I know now you run the Flamboyán Theater. Flamboyán Theater in Denver, but I mean, did you have a passion for the arts early on in your life?
Yeah, when I was 6, I started going to this school in Georgia. That funny enough, the drama teacher had been my babysitter when we had lived in Baltimore previously. I say I was living in Georgia when I was 6. It was the 5th place I lived in.
Okay.
So it's giving you an idea of what my early childhood was. So the elementary school that I went to, it had a really good arts program. In fact, it was a mandatory arts program. We had to, every week we had art classes, music classes, and drama classes. And the drama teacher had actually been my babysitter when we had lived in Baltimore. So we moved to Georgia from Baltimore. And that was actually the 5th place that I had moved from by the age of 6. So I was all over the place, just to give you an idea of,
Were you
what
guys
my childhood
moving?
was like.
Were you guys moving because of, like, military or
No,
just?
no. Well, what's funny is my dad was in the Navy, but he got out before I was born. Like right before I was born. He was an engineer, and he was trying to move up the ladder, and so he would just take whatever job would help him in his career, and that meant a lot of moving for us. Um, but in this elementary school, my drama teacher was this really really wonderful lady named Miss Thornton, and she saw a lot of potential in me, and I love drama class, and I had already started to become obsessed with books and wanting to like write my own stories. I think the first short story that I wrote that could be called like an actual like story was when I was 8. I wrote, I think it was a vampire story is what I wrote. I was very obsessed with horror also at the time. So yeah, I immediately felt a connection to and a warmth for theater and also for literature, and I think and I think that passion for it also invited certain adults in my life to see some promise in me, and I got pushed toward that direction quite a lot all throughout my childhood. I had several teachers who I remember this one. She was my 11th grade English teacher, and she was like, I remember her telling me she was like, John, like you can write, like yeah, there's a lot of kids interested in writing, but like you have a talent, like this is an actual thing that you can do, and her being incredibly encouraging. And then just theater became a home for me, like it does for a lot of kids, especially kids with uh, with dysfunctional families, which I'm totally open to talking about. I mean, it's just a part of who I am. And it was a very chaotic household that I grew up in, and the theater provided a sort of stability. And theater people being very accepting and very nurturing, I felt very safe in that environment, and with the kinds of mentors that I got in doing first community theater and then regional theater. And eventually, when I was 18, I actually joined a professional street performance group, and we would do performances all around town and First Friday events, and that was an amazing experience to have as a young person. But it all kind of started with having that support system.
So you said that the theater helped support, uh, give you support from your dysfunctional lifestyle that you were dealing with. Was it one of those situations where it's like the less time you were home and the more time you were doing theater stuff, the better you felt?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. I, you know, even like in high school, being involved in different theaters, and especially the fact that I was able to get roles outside of like a school play, and I was doing things outside of just like what school had to offer. Got a big ego out of that, and really felt like I was an adult. And I was one of those kids that definitely wanted to grow up. I wasn't interested in staying a kid. I wanted to already be driving and going out to all adult places, and just being around adults. Like I was very obsessed with that at the time. And I felt special. I felt special to when I was 18 years old, get cast in a regional production of Angels in America. This is a very difficult play, and it's a very advanced play for any actor. And the fact that I got cast as a character 10 years older than me, and that made me feel special. It made me feel like, okay, I must really have something.
And do you think the people that were part of this theater group, the part of your theater life, helped influence you to keep motivating you to keep succeeding and doing more with your life?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I feel very fortunate to have been around very ambitious people. And aside from that, aside from just the encouragement that I got from peers and from the community, my parents have an incredible work ethic, and even if they didn't always understand like why I was doing the things I was doing or why I was so interested in the arts, um, I think they did respect and still do respect the hustle and the persistence that I have in pursuing the things that I want to pursue. Because that's how they were. You know, my mom was an educator and had to overcome a lot of sexism and racism, being an Afro Puerto Rican woman. I never let that stop her from expressing her opinions and expressing what she felt was the right way to teach kids. And she was a Spanish teacher. So she really had no tolerance for a white male administrator telling her how to teach Spanish, you know,
Yeah.
how to teach her own language. You know, and my dad was someone who, I mean, he was very career minded and very ambitious. He was also very thoughtful. You know, he became a manager early on, and actually a lot of his experiences as a manager and as a leader in his own industry has been very inspirational for me and has inspired some of the ways that I try to work with people and try to be both empathetic but still get the job done. So you know, I think it's kind of in my blood to be a leader and to be ambitious, and then to also get that encouragement from the outside world. It really made me feel like, okay, this isn't just in my head, you know. It's not just me thinking that I'm great. It's other people are seeing that I do have something to offer. So I think it was a mix of those things.
Nice. And you mentioned that your grandmother was a big influence in your life. You know, can you want to tell me a little bit about your grandmother?
Yeah, so my abuela Rosaura, she, uh, I don't know what to say. I mean, you know, as an abuela, she was just the sweetest, most loving, most encouraging person possible. You know, her and my abuelo, who unfortunately died when I was 6, they got a house in Fajardo, overlooking a marina, actually. So it was just on a hillside, and as you can imagine, being a kid and like seeing like the sunrise over the marina, and being able to it's just play out there, and there's like the palm trees, and they have this like big bean tree, and you have the ocean in the distance. It was a really idyllic place. And my abuela, you know, my Spanish wasn't very good growing up. I would say that by the time I was a preteen, um, I could have a very basic conversation in Spanish, but I didn't become fluent until after she had died. She died when I was 19, um, and yet we still communicated, and she helped me with my Spanish a bit. I helped her a little bit with English, and even I remember during the Vieques protests in Puerto Rico when are you familiar with
Yeah.
that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But if you want to kind of explain it a
well,
little bit for
for
people
any
listening.
listeners who aren't familiar, the U.S. used Vieques, which is an island off the coast of Puerto Rico, which is a part of Puerto Rico, used half of it as a bombing range for 50 years. And I believe it was 98, one of those bombs killed 2 Puerto Ricans. And in the aftermath, there was these massive protests that lasted over a year, well into 2000. And in the end, the protests got the U.S. to remove the Marines from Vieques, which is a huge triumph for the Puerto Rican people. And Fajardo is actually, to get to Vieques, you have to go to Fajardo first. So like the boats that leave from Vieques are there. So a lot of the marches against the bombing of Vieques went in front of my abuela's house. And I remember I was about 15, writing a short story about those protests, and like put myself into it, and did all the dramatic things that you do. And I remember being able to share that with her, and she was so encouraging, even though like probably half of what I wrote she didn't understand, but it didn't matter. She was encouraging. I'm her nieto, and she just provided stability, but she also is a badass woman. I hope it's okay to say that word, but she after my abuelo died, she just like reinvented herself. She got really into bingo nights, like playing bingo and slot machines that was her passion.
Yeah.
And in Fajardo there's a place called El Conquistador, which is it's a 5-star hotel, and casino. And she would go there and gamble once a week, and also see her friends. And she like built a whole friend group for herself. And she had a community, like she didn't, her identity wasn't just being a mom or an abuela. Like her identity was also about herself and about living the life that she wanted to live. And that was very, very inspiring for me to see that sort of confidence, especially that sort of confidence after what had been a very difficult life that she had. So yeah, she's still very special to me.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, as someone who's my grandmother's favorite, I know that love and that bond, and it's nice to have something that's inspirational like that. And it also seems like because of you're close to your grandmother, you also spent a lot of time on the island, and that kind of overlap with your love of Puerto Rico and your love of that, and that seems to have influenced a lot of what you're doing. Did you know early on
Absolutely.
how you were influencing yourself? Not did you know, but did you start? I know you said you started writing about Puerto Rico, about the Vieques. Is that kind of starting your whole path into focusing on including your love of your island with your art?
That story was probably it probably was the first time that I had written about the island. A couple years prior to that, so we're talking like 96, when the internet finally becomes available to everybody.
AOL, very well.
Yeah, and it's it was AOL, it was dial-up.
Yeah.
It took 20 minutes to log on, and you always had to get off because somebody had to make a phone call. But in those early days of the internet, when it was mostly text-based, like a lot of people don't remember, the internet was largely just text, and as a result, the only law that's ever been passed in regulating the internet is from that time period, and so it placed the internet under the same category as literature. And it was actually just like a year or two ago. It was very recently. It was post-COVID. There were some legislators wanting to revisit that law, because one of the things that law allowed, I know I'm getting a little off base, but I promise I'm going to come back.
There you go.
So the thing with that law is that it's the reason why pornography is so rampant on the internet, because there were a bunch of laws passed in the 1960s protecting freedom of speech for writers. And so you have a bunch of pornographers operating under laws for writers.
Nice.
But you also have a lot of protections for political speech. Mm-hmm. And so all of these conspiracy theories and all these wacko stuff that you see online is also protected under that law, right? And so there's a lot of people that want to like change that so that they can be a little more strict. But back in the early 90s, because of that law, you ended up having tons of stuff on the internet that hadn't been so readily public before. Amongst those things, material on Puerto Rican independence and the fight for Puerto Rican independence, and especially Pedro Albizu Campos, who in his day was public enemy number one. He led a revolution against the United States in 1950 to liberate Puerto Rico. That resulted in him being sent to a prison in Atlanta where he was tortured for 6 years. And the torture that he experienced were radiation experiments, where they would blast x-rays into his prison cell. And he ended up burning 60% of his skin irreparably, that he had burns all the way until he died. And he ended up dying of those injuries 12 years after he got out of prison. An incredible hero, someone I've always idolized, as does anyone who loves Puerto Rico idolizes him. And I learned about him because they were able to put this up on the internet and the government couldn't stop it. Yeah. I learned about Pedro Albizu Campos, I learned about the revolution, I learned about the Ponce massacre and the Rio Piedras massacre, I learned about Cerro Maravilla, and I learned all those things when I was like 13, 14 years old. So very formative time for me. And I would say that really radicalized me in being, not only politically radicalized, but also just identity. You know, my brother and sister struggled, and still do, struggled with feeling like they belonged with Puerto Ricans, feeling like they were accepted, like they were enough. But for me, I was like, no, soy hijo de Pedro. You know, I'm a son of Albizu. Like, I completely identify with his struggle. And the reason that I'm here in this country is because of what the U.S. has done to us and have made Puerto Rico so inhospitable to live in. And so I'm fighting this fight too. I'm here with you, Don Pedro, you know? And that kind of strengthened my own sense of saying F you to anybody who ever questioned my Puerto Ricanness. And I think because like that happened at a very formative age, and then was immediately followed by Vieques. And Vieques was the first time in over 20 years at that point that Puerto Rican independence had even been popular. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the U.S. has a history of basically every time there's an upswing and a desire for independence, either one of our leaders are murdered, or in the case of Cerro Maravilla, our activists are murdered. And it's all a scare tactic to keep us down. Yeah. So yeah, those were very formative things for me. And writing that story was the first time that I wrote about Puerto Rico, about being Puerto Rican and what that meant to me. And really from that point on, I mean, all of my books, I've written 5 books. All of them deal with the Puerto Rican experience. My 2 plays, Puerto Rican Nocturne and Empire of Solitude, which is about Julia de Burgos. Those are about the Puerto Rican experience and wrestling with a lot of these philosophical and political ideas that are very difficult to express in an environment where, because we are pinned as just Latinos, and the Latino movement is largely Mexican American, to kind of at the expense of everybody else. The Latino movement is all about assimilation to the United States. It's all about coming to the United States, loving the United States, revering the United States. It's very pro-American. And then the Puerto Rican independence movement is very get America off our land, and it puts you in a very weird place as a Puerto Rican artist to be proudly Puerto Rican and outspoken about your own support for that independence, because it does put you at odds with the rest of the community in a way that also has been very fascinating for me as an artistic person.
Yeah, I think it's very hard for a Puerto Rican to not be somewhat political in their ideology one way or another. It's just in your nature.
Yeah.
But then also, I think people don't understand how much writers have influenced revolutions, from like Jose Marti to, all over the place, where you have, you know I think even like in Cuba, the downfall that got Castro into thing was that we had a lot of college kids that were allowed to write, which allowed freedoms
Mm-hmm.
of writing that were able to get spread out. So like the same way you learned because of all the writings on the internet. And so, tell me a little bit about the books that you've written and your process and, getting published and stuff like that. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah. Man. Well, first let me tell you about the publishing process of it, because mine was very weird. Mine is very different. It's not the typical, like, oh, I got an MFA and I, went to NYU or I got an agent and da. No. So I first got published in 2006 in a short story anthology called The Shortcut. And that was actually for a story called The Revolutionary, which was about a Puerto Rican patriot who, for reasons that are revealed over the course of the story, fled Puerto Rico in the 1920s and is living in Cuba in the 40s. And he befriends a young girl who's going through a really hard time. And the story is about that friendship, and it's about how he begins opening up to her about what his past was. And in unlocking his past, he's able to give her a hope for her future. And so, yeah, it was a really good story. It's still one of my favorite stories. And so that gets published in a short story anthology when I was 22. And then when I got out of college, because it was a great recession, the only job I was able to get. So originally I was going to return to Puerto Rico. I had a job lined up for me with El Instituto de Cultura in San Juan. And that was my plan. I was going to go back to San Juan. My ex-wife supported that at the time. And then, in Puerto Rico, it was a depression. It wasn't a recession. It was a depression, which we still have not gotten out of.
Yep.
And so all of the programs at El Instituto were cut. Everything I had worked for 4 years was out the window. So I ended up getting a tech support job, a very bad tech support job. But I could use my degree because it was a bilingual job, and my degree is in Spanish studies. So while I was working that job, I was still like, well, I want to be involved in literature in some way. Right. And I got a job as an editor at a publishing house called Savant Books, which still exists, and it's based out of Hawaii. And I became an editor for them. I ended up representing 4 or 5 of their authors over the course of the time I was with them. And I gained such a good reputation with the authors that they actually wanted to make me the editor-in-chief. But because they were a small company and the publishing industry being the way it is, I wasn't going to be paid for doing that. I would only be paid royalties, which is the same as being an editor.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't pay you crap, right? It pays you nothing. And it was around that time I got sent away to the Army. But prior to going into the Army, the guy who was the editor-in-chief, this guy named Zach Oliver, I had edited one of his books, and then he became editor-in-chief because I had turned the job down. And I asked him, like, hey, I have this manuscript, which this manuscript had almost been published 2 other times. And both times, the publishing house that picked it up folded. Like, this book was cursed. This book was cursed. And, but I still asked Zach, like, hey, could you look at this and just tell me if I should keep trying to get it published? And it was a book of short stories about interconnected short stories, and the connecting strand were these 2 friends who take a cross-country trip trying to escape their lives, which are going nowhere, and the ultimate what ultimately happens on this cross-country trip is that one of them decides that he wants to go back to Puerto Rico and fight for independence. So a lot of these stories also deal with Puerto Rican independence. It included that short story that had been published previously. And so I give it to Zach, and I'm just like, be honest with me. Be 100% honest with me. If it's not good enough, I'll just dump it, and I'll just write something else. And about a week goes by, and he emails me and he says, we're publishing this. I'll tell you this right now. Not only should it be published, but we are going to publish it. And that was how I got published. That was how I started off being an author, which is very different. It was from the inside. I was an editor. I'm really glad that I had the experience in publishing that I did, because it actually set the groundwork for what I now do with Flamboyán, with our Emerging Playwrights program, where we develop new playwrights, not only creatively, but also professionally. There's an astounding lack of professional development for writers in every field. And so what made me aware of that is, I got published because I was an editor. Being an editor meant that I got to learn the ins and outs of a publishing house. I got to learn why they make the choices that they make, the way that they regard writers, the way that they look at writers, as a commodity and also as a creative partner. And having that professional insight as a writer was game-changing for me. And it was also something that I saw the more and more writers that I worked with, I saw the astounding lack of knowledge that they had about the way that the industry actually functions. So as a writer myself, I was able to navigate spaces more intelligently and more efficiently, so that, I'm 39 now. I can't tell you how many writers I know in their late 40s, their 50s, their 60s, who haven't been published as much as I have been. And that's not just with books, it's also with articles, with short stories, poems, all of that sort of stuff. I have been published a lot. And I was able to do that because I understood the way the business worked. And now I'm trying to do that with theater, which we can get into in a little bit. But having gotten my first book published that way, it was very easy for me to get my next book published, which happened after I started being in the military. And when I got out of basic training, Zach had left Savant and started up his own publishing company, and he asked me to run its editorial department. And it was through that experience that I came to represent over 20 writers in about 7 different countries. And it's where I also got introduced to the literary scene in New York, as well as the theater scene in New York. And that ended up opening up the door for me to eventually create Flamboyán.
And so tell me a little bit about Flamboyán and what you guys do there.
Well, so Flamboyán essentially came about because so after Hurricane Maria, I I decided to change a book that I had been developing about the Cerro Maravilla murders into a play, which is Puerto Rican Nocturne. And I had a few friends in New York who had asked me to be a part of a short play festival that they were doing as a fundraiser. And that was the germ of the idea of making Puerto Rican Nocturne a play. And I was able to get the resources put together to put that play on. It was going to premiere on March 13th, 2020, which is the day that everything shut down.
Yeah.
So that production went out the window. And instead, 2 years later, after I had moved up to Denver, I had been living in Colorado Springs prior to that, which is about an hour south of Denver. I moved to Denver in 2021. And then in 2022, I had made enough connections that I was able to do a full production of Puerto Rican Nocturne here. It premiered at an historic theater here called The Bug, which started its life as a silent movie house. And in getting that play put on, so being a representative for authors in the publishing world taught me how to interact with the media and how to get the media to pay attention to you. And so I was able to get a lot of coverage for Puerto Rican Nocturne, even though I didn't really have much of a base here in Denver. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people who ended up coming out, both to audition as actors and also as audience members for the show itself, ended up expressing to me how alone they had felt here in Denver and that they didn't even realize there were other Puerto Ricans here. They just feel like the whole culture of Denver ignores them because Denver actually has a very large Latino art scene, but it's all Mexican and Chicano. And just to the exclusion of everybody else. There are a couple institutions, most notably the Museo de las Americas, that is a lot more inclusive and brings in all of Latin America into their exhibits. They're a wonderful institution. If any of your listeners plan to go to Denver, I highly recommend it. Mm-hmm. So not only did I get that response, I also got the response of there's actually a large amount of Hurricane Maria refugees who live in Denver. And this community is just very unknown and nobody has tapped into them. And so I initially started off Flamboyán as more broadly BIPOC, but wasn't able to get much traction with that. And I was like, what am I doing? Why am I going away from what I know myself to be? I'm Puerto Rican. Puerto Rican arts are what bring me passion. My people are what bring me passion. And it was frankly fear. I was afraid of just going all in on the Puerto Rican thing. Mm-hmm. Because I thought there wasn't room for us here. But I've instead found, since refocusing Flamboyán to being just about Puerto Rican artists, so much support, because there are Puerto Ricans who are working in all sorts of different fields here and who have businesses here and who are really hungering for stories to represent our people. Mm. And, and we do this through our original productions. I mentioned Empire of Solitude earlier, which is about Juliana Burgos and is a celebration of her life and her poetry. But also being a veteran, and I've connected with a lot of other veterans here, and one of them being a writer, Denise Subizarreta, who wrote a play called Denise, which is about her time in serving in Guantanamo Bay after 9/11 and how it affected her marriage, which is a story that I believe a lot of veterans, no matter your background, will relate to. But especially being able to tell a Latino veteran story in this vein is very important, I believe, for our community. And then our emerging playwrights program, which just launched yesterday. We have two really exciting writers, Bailey Schlichman and Alejandro Valverde, who is a Mexican Puerto Rican. Both of them living out in the Western United States. And the theme for our Emerging Playwrights program this year is Western Boricuas, focusing on the diaspora that is west of the Mississippi, who is overlooked, and trying to connect them back to the rest of the diaspora, the more established communities in Chicago and New York and Orlando, as well as the island itself. Because I believe that the future of our people depends on the unity of our people. Mm-hmm. And this program, these writers are mentored on their scripts, but they also engage with content that I've created, these classes, which focus on professional development, on how to engage with the media, how to engage with an audience, how to build a budget and a marketing plan, how to work with a director, how to work with actors, how to work with a tech crew, all the different things that you need to know to actually produce a play. And this is all in the hope, because I'm doing this kind of stuff, but this stuff that I'm doing does not matter if the people I teach don't then teach others. So what I'm hoping for is that Bailey and Alejandro and all of our future students, I'll just call them students, that they will take this knowledge and teach it in their own communities and set up their own theater companies. But once you know the business side of theater, once you know the way that it functions, then you're able to do a lot more with your creative work. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is most important to me in communicating in this program is how, even though the business side is all about commodity, you as the artist have to keep your humanity. Mm-hmm. If you lose your humanity, there's no point in you doing this. You have to keep who you are. And the more you see yourself as a commodity, not only do you limit yourself as a human being, but you also limit your work, because you're trying to write things for your TikTok and Instagram and Twitter followers instead of what is most important to you in your heart. Mm-hmm. And what's most important to your heart might not seem marketable. But here's the great thing about the age that we live in. We live in an age where the internet allows you to reach any audience mm-hmm. who's interested in anything. And so this whole idea that, because of where I live, because of my racial or ethnic background, because of my particular interests, I can only tell certain kinds of stories because there's only one kind of audience. Mm-hmm. That is old thinking. That is pre-internet thinking. Mm-hmm. We're in the internet era. You need to embrace that there is a community and there is an audience no matter where you are and no matter who you are.
Yeah, it was one of the questions I was going to ask you, because that was something you brought up in your pre-interview about keeping your humanity, and it reminds me of this book that I really like by Simon Sinek, Start With Why, where it's the how and what you're doing doesn't matter if you have a strong why, if your purpose is strong and you have a strong reason of doing it, everything else will fall into place as long as you can always maintain that, like you said, that humanity as your goal. Mm-hmm. So it's a wonderful thing that you're doing there. And have you seen a lot of, because you're talking about a big factor that I think a lot of people don't understand when they're trying to start off something, is not just knowing the passion and not knowing just the what you're good at, but understanding the business, understanding the media. Like, mm-hmm. Have you noticed that people who have come to your classes, have come to Flamboyant, are starting to like, that was the missing part that allowed me to mm-hmm. branch out?
Yeah, I think that that is the response that I've mostly gotten, has been like, okay, now I understand why this is run this way. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of misunderstanding of why arts organizations make the decisions that they do, and why there's there's a tendency amongst the artist to look at the institution that they're trying to appeal to as not also being people, or not also having their own business concerns. Because like we're putting our heart out there, we're putting ourselves on the line. And so if we're not accepted, we take it very personally. But you would be amazed how many times like I've submitted work and I get told no, but then an editor who had also reviewed my work reaches out to me later on and says, "Hey, we really enjoyed what you submitted. Will you mind submitting again? We'd really like to showcase you." Mm-hmm. Or, one time I submitted a story and for a grant, and I was turned down for the grant, but the publication came back to me and said, "Hey, we still want to publish your story. And we can't give you what the grant offered, but we will give you the stipend." The people who run artistic institutions and organizations are fans also. And they are having to cater their tastes for what the organization is wanting. It does not mean that they're always selecting the thing they themselves want the most. Mm. So just getting yourself out there and exposing yourself to more people and getting more people to know you, that's really the most productive thing. And you don't necessarily want all institutions to love what you're doing. It might speak to pulling punches on your part as an artist. It might speak to like maybe you're not taking risks the way that you should. Rejection is not necessarily failure. And when these writers find out about the way the business works and the way that the reason why decisions are made the way that they're made, I hope that it's kind of a relief for them to see like, okay, I can navigate this space, not take it personally, also not sacrifice myself, and make better decisions about who I reach out to, because not every place is going to be made for you. And if you can't find any place for you, that's when you need to start looking for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's a great lesson to learn, and it's something I think that comes with time. The whole idea of not taking things personal and realizing that rejection isn't the end of the road; it's just a different opportunity, and you branch off from where you're at. So great lessons to kind of learn. Speaking of that, if you were trying to go back in time and talk to the younger version of yourself, what's something you would what's some lessons you'd give yourself to help you on your journey that you wish you had known?
I would tell my younger self to not sacrifice any part of myself. Mm-hmm. I've really struggled with censoring myself in order to please others. I've struggled with the people pleasing gene and standing up for myself and saying like, this is really the thing that I want. And I think I would have pushed my younger self to do that more, because, I've experienced a whole lot of happiness and a whole lot of opportunity in the last couple of years. And every time that it's come about, it's been because I've not censored any aspect of myself. I have been a 100% Jon Marcantoni. And people respond to that. People respond to your authenticity, and people can tell when you are anything less than yourself. Mm-hmm. And people can tell when you're not really passionate about something. So, just save yourself a lot of time. And even if it seems risky, even if you're nervous about it, just go for it. Because like you know who you are, and nobody can take that from you. And it's also the thing that makes you stand out from others.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then my last question for you before we go is, how do you say success in Spanglish? What does success mean to you?
And it's authenticity. Yeah. Authenticity all the way. you know, and the way you interact with people and the way that you engage with your loved ones, with your community, and mostly with yourself. You know, if you're spending your days just posting online, like online is the last place you'll ever be authentic. You know, I mean, I know, but buddies like buddies of mine like George Torres, who we read on,
Yeah.
he's done a great job of showcasing his authenticity online. But he is a rarity, and he's also very self-aware about what he is presenting to the world. Most people aren't. Most people are really just trying to get the likes and really just trying to fit in. And, you know, simply because you can express an opinion doesn't mean that your insecurities and your fears aren't coming out in that opinion. You know, I'm definitely someone who believes that if people are agreeing with every single thing that you're saying, then you need to think about what you're saying. You know, because if you're really being yourself and you're really being honest, you're going to have some pushback. And you want that. You want dialogue with people. You don't want to be a dictator who just everybody is a yes man or woman and letting you get away with your worst tendencies. You want people who will call you on your garbage. And yeah. So it's just authenticity, man.
Nice, man. Oh, well, John, it's been wonderful having you on here. You know, if you want, you know, tell me a little bit. Tell me how people can help out. If there's any way they can help out or keep up to date with what you guys are doing.
Yeah. You know, follow Flamboyán Theater at Flamboyán FLAMBOYAN _ theater, and that's theater ER, not RE. So at Flamboyán Theater, at Flamboyán _ theater on Instagram. That's the best way to keep up with what we're doing. And you know, yeah, that's the best way.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on here. I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate the fact that you reached out to me as well. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to, you know, what more comes from you guys out there in Denver. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate you, and I love your show, and I hope you have much success for a long time.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. When random people hit me up and say, "Hey, I listen to your show," and it's not just somebody I know, it's like it feels great. I'm really glad that I'm getting a reach out there. So I do appreciate you taking the time. And for everyone else listening, you know, thanks again for jumping on and listening. And I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue to learn how to say success in Spanish.